I'm going to share my screen. Hold on. Okay. I thought I could share it already with the PowerPoint open, but apparently not. Okay, so good evening, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm presenting today a topic which is unusual even for me. It's a new topic I'm working on, and I wanted to talk about the context of research a little bit. So this paper I wrote, it hasn't been published, but it's finished, but input is still welcome. So it's for a special issue of that I'm co-editing for Central Asian Affairs with Svetlana Pieshkova from University of New Hampshire. And with this special issue, we were interested in studying changing what we see, what we observe as changing gender orders in Central Asia, conflicting gender norms that are prevalent across the region. And personally, I wanted to sort of move away from gender studies that focus exclusively on women, and particularly on the oppression of women. So I'm not denying that this is a important topic and that is happening in Central Asia. I've written about that myself. But this is not the only thing that we can look at when we talk about gender, because gender is not only about women, it's also about men and masculinities. And also I wanted to sort of challenge the conservative view, not the common view, common perception of Central Asia as re-traditionalizing societies, Islamizing societies where conservative norms are prevalent. But I think the paper today really challenges this assumption. So I'll start with a quote. It's a bit long, but I think it's worth reading. This is the picture of Nurlan Nurpeysov. He's a fairly known, successful businessman in Kazakhstan. And this is from an excerpt from a Facebook post that he made in January, I think, 2021. So it's not just a random Facebook post that I found on Facebook, but this post has been picked up by mainstream media in Kazakhstan. So this is from Tengri News. And Pierre Canal, First Channel, also ran a story about him, about this particular post. So he was coming, he made this post to support a male escort that had been arrested in Nur Sultan a few days prior. And in Kazakhstan, you should know that prostitution is not illegal unless there are some conditions, but working, selling sex in a brothel is illegal, but the penalty for that is not that harsh. It's a fine. It's an administrative offense. So he was arrested and fined the equivalent of $100. But Nurpeysov said, why aren't we legalizing sex work altogether? This young man shouldn't be punished. So because such a service is needed, because basically he's saying that men are inadequate, they are impotent. So it's a very harsh criticism towards Kazakhstani men who basically cannot sexually satisfy their wives. And instead of encouraging, so this post was surprising in many regards. Maybe I have myself a bias in thinking that those topics do not make it to mainstream media, don't make the headlines. So this made it. So it was surprising because it made it to mainstream media, and it's a harsh criticism towards Kazakhstani men, and also an acknowledgement that women's sexuality is very important. But the last point is also significant here in the story, and basically Nurpeysov gave me my argument for this paper is that yes, women want and need sex, but they can do it only in a way that does not hurt their reputation. So that's the key element here. So as I mentioned, so a few words about male sex work in Kazakhstan. So prostitution is decriminalized in Kazakhstan since 2001, but it's not legal. So you cannot declare this as your commercial activity. To my knowledge, there were no attempts to fully legalize prostitution. But since it is not illegal, it's relatively prevalent, unless, as I mentioned, it's a crime if it's practiced in a brothel, if it involves minors, and if it involves trafficking. And recently, the Kazakhstani media has reported on the increasing visibility of male sex work, especially online. But the male escorts in the story was working in a brothel, so perhaps also online. The story, we don't know that. But there seems to be an increase. So several Kazakhstani media reported on that, including The Steppe and Tengri News, Nur KZ. And the literature on Kazakhstan on male sex work or sex work in general in Central Asia is very scarce, unless it is in the context of the HIV epidemic. So from this angle, you have a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but significant number of studies. But in terms of analyzing the quality, to have a qualitative assessment of what male sex work looks like in Central Asia, there's really not much. And there is, though, one study of Aygazin and Tuleu, made in 2019. These are Kazakhstani scholars, independent scholars, and they have looked at one website that I will mention as well in my research, that I've looked at as well. That is a very large platform for selling, for promoting sex workers. They can promote themselves on this platform, and it has a significant number of profiles and people advertising, but their research is very, very empirical. So there's no basic analysis. So I was interested in sort of try to understand male sex work in the context of the Kazakhstani society. So how is this developing? What can male sex work tell us about gender norms in Central Asia? I'll go quick on this. So it's a bit of a review of the literature that I looked at on male sex work around the world. It's fairly under-researched. It's understandable because there are fewer, among all sex workers in the world, there are fewer men. The first stats that you see here, men make 20% of all sex workers. It's difficult to know because it's often a sort of part of the shadow economy. So numbers are always approximate. And this number also includes people who have been trafficked. So I don't think it's fairly representative of the people I'm going to talk about today, the male sex workers I'm going to talk about today. A study conducted in the Netherlands in 2014, where prostitution is, well, more or less legal, concluded that only 5% of sex workers were males. So that's really low. So the overwhelming proportion of an overwhelming proportion of research is dedicated to women, and among that, among the small portion of research that is dedicated to male sex work, it focuses mostly on homosexual sex work. So in this edited volume, 2014, there are 15 chapters on male sex work. It's called Men Who Sell Sex. There's not a single chapter about heterosexual male sex work. And there is one mention of heterosexual male sex work that's written by the Özbay, who talks about Turkey. So he says, I have not come across men who sell sex to women in exchange for money, gifts, or other rewards in the course of a decades-long research. That's about Turkey. So that's quite interesting to see that, in contrast, in Kazakhstan, and this is I think one of my arguments is that male sex work is overwhelmingly heterosexual. When I should have precised that, I mean that these are male escorts offering services to women only, right? This is what I understood about heterosexual male sex work. And when it is studied, it's often in the context of tourism, where mostly female tourists from the global north will travel to the global south to have sex with young men in the Caribbean or Egypt are often frequent case studies. But in the case of Kazakhstan, I think we can all agree that Kazakhstan is not a holiday. It's a holiday destination, but nothing like Egypt or the Caribbeans. And the market here seems to be oriented towards local, seems to target local women, because the sites that I've looked at are entirely in Russian. They could be Russian tourists, however, but not from the what we understood normally as the global north. So given that, my question was, why does the sex market in Kazakhstan why is it so different than the rest of the world? Because it is overwhelmingly heterosexual. The other question would be, why do Kazakhstani women increasingly buy sexual services from men, which also seems to be an oddity in Central Asia. So my argument is that there is, on the one hand, a desire for sexual emancipation from women that is constrained by conservative views surrounding female sexuality. So, as I said, Nurpeysov provided me with this argument, so I'm just elaborating on it. So my methodology that I use, so I did digital data collection on 2 different websites that are very easy to access. You don't need any passwords or anything. Just confirm that you are 18 years or older, and you can have access to the database. So one of them contained more than 2,000 advertisements, but the other one had only less than 100, so it's not very significant. But even on the site, that the smaller site, a majority of advertisements were posted by male escorts and not by females. In the other one, the one that I looked at more thoroughly, there were more advertisements made by females, but I'll show you some figures in a moment. So what I did, because there are thousands of them, and as you probably noticed, I'm not a very quantitative person. So I sampled 100 profiles from each. It's divided by cities. So I took Almaty and Nur Sultan. So I looked at 100 profiles to gather some figures from those profiles. We'll show in a moment. Some of the advantages, well, it's of this method, it's obvious because it's well, digital, remote work, it's easy, especially in pandemic, but it's also a very sensitive issue. As you can imagine, journalists who worked on that thought that it was very difficult, reported that it was very difficult to get in touch with male escorts and even more with customers. So it's it's an easy way, a non-intrusive way to conduct research. Disadvantages, so the data is not very structured and very fluid. So if you have the curiosity, I can provide the website address later. But it's hard to, it's very fluid because advertisements get deleted all the time. So the data is not stable. And one of the other question that is quite, that you're probably already asking. So yes, there is an offer. It's a market. There is an offer, but is there demand? So I think I don't have I cannot say 100% for sure that women respond, to these ads, but I think it's safe to assume that they do, that the offer is matched by some demand from women, because if we cross-reference with Kazakhstani media reporting on that and the number of ads that we see in the site, so I think it's fairly safe to assume that there is a demand as well. And so this is just preliminary work, preliminary research for me. So it's an invitation to pursue research on such issues. So I'm showing you a typical ad. This is a screenshot. This has been a very awkward field work for me. So this was quite interesting. So I just want to mention, so this is like sort of the anquieta, typical anquieta. Probably not a real name. So it mentions the height, the age, nationality, where they're from, and the size of their penis. And for women, it's on women's profiles, you see these are mandatory categories that they have to fill because they are present on every single profile. For women, it's the size of breast that is indicated there. And these are prices. And here is the translation. So young man, works only with ladies. This is something that we see very often. So, and in the yellow part, I won't read I won't read all this, but these are the services that they offer. And in that case, as in a majority of profiles, the services are only offered to women. It's written in the anquieta, but it's also written in the little description. So and this is a very typical advertisement that emphasizes that the escort is not interested in providing services to men. So these are basic demographics. So this is based on the sample that I've done of 100 profiles in each city. So average age men are quite young. And they are, I think I haven't seen any profiles with someone, I think I've seen one profile with someone above 40, so very young men. Average price, slightly higher in Almaty. I'm not sure why. I think it's probably because of the presence in my sample of couples, and they tend to charge heterosexual couples, and they tend to charge higher prices. And presence of explicit photos of genitals. And this, I included that because in the literature on male sex work around the world, it's often emphasized that the photos are not very explicit overall. And specifically in the case of male sex work for women, they are face photos. And in the case of Kazakhstan, it's again an outlier because I have seen 3 or 4 profiles out of the hundreds that I've looked at that had face photos. And that says something about the stigma that is associated with sex work. The female profiles that I've looked at superficially also have, no one has face pictures over there. But in general, around the world, that's unusual. And women in Kazakhstani sex workers tend not to have explicit photos of their bodies. They are erotic photos, but not explicit. But men have, as you can see, their profiles have very explicit photos, which is at odds with the literature again, but says something about the stigma associated to male work. So being identified personally to sex work. And this is what is interesting. So this is the distribution of escorts ads based on gender. So for some reason, the females are called fae, which is fairies in English. So they're called fairies. And men are called parani, young men. And there's also trans who are offering sex services. And as you can see, so these are based on the total number of ads. So 51% of ads were posted by female escorts, 38 by males, which is, again, extremely high in comparison to what we see in the literature, and trans 10%, which is also, I was a bit surprised to see for Almaty. So these are the numbers of ads overall on that particular website. So it's very high. And what is interesting is this is on a sample of 100 profiles that the clientele targeted is overwhelmingly, as I mentioned, heterosexual. So numbers are fairly similar in both cities. So 75 out of the 100 profiles mentioned that they offer services to women only. Some both, and only 5% to men only. So that's quite interesting. And again, at odds with the literature, a lot of the the literature on homosexual sex work, the ads often the majority of ads that are posted by men are presented by very masculine men who tend to charge higher prices, prices for sex work. But in Kazakhstan, the few advertisements that I've seen that are oriented towards homosexual sex work, men tend to portray themselves as quite feminine and submissive. So that's something that is quite at odds with the literature again. Yes, few conclusions from this observation is that overwhelmingly heterosexual, at odds with the literature in many regards. And even though male escorts who offer heterosexual services are still conforming to some of the gender expectations, right? So of having an active sex life, being a good sexual partner, but it still remains taboo, which is seen through the absence of photos in their profiles. And what is interesting is that monetary gain is not always a motivation. This is found also in the literature in the Netherlands, for instance. There were reports of that. And so this is a bit funny. And males tend to enjoy sex work more because they feel like it's a gig more than a job, and they also have less customers in general. So it doesn't occupy their work so much. It's more of a side job. And one of the advertisements, a few of the advertisements that I've seen were like that out of the 100. So this one you can see, this man is advertising free services and even pizza. So this one feels quite joyful, is really enjoying doing this, obviously. And it's seen again, so that women can take care of themselves and feel good. And this is not the only ad. Some of them were more, I would say, vulgar, but there is my research and my observation indicate that it might be the case that money is not always the incentive here, and some profiles tend to advertise very, very low prices that are you wonder how they will not make any money out of this. And one of them was specifically saying that he will have sex with beautiful women for free. So I wonder how he makes the separation between beautiful and not beautiful. But yeah, so that's another indication of that. So coming to my argument, what I'm interested in is, as I mentioned earlier, in the conflicting gender norms in Central Asia. So we have a post-Soviet order that still bears the legacy of the Soviet Union, where state was the sexuality was even a matter of the state, because of the totalitarian aspect of politics. And that you probably often heard the old Soviet joke in the USSR: there is no sex. Yeah, so it was a very private matter that was geared towards reproduction. And in post-Soviet Central Asia, you have conflicting gender norms, because some nationalist secular ideologies are pushing traditional values. It's less obvious in Kazakhstan, but very obvious in Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan, for instance. Some of the values that are promoted, like female modesty and obedience, are part of the official narratives. Sometimes even literally. If you remember Shymkent's story with the city of Shymkent that was shaming women who were dressed too sexy, for instance. So, and in general, sexuality remains taboo. Premarital sex is considered unacceptable. But at the same time, you also have in the post-Soviet order the sort of people have the possibility to explore alternative lifestyles, and sexuality becomes a possible discourse, like we have seen in the advertisements in the article I discussed at the beginning. And with the new technologies of exchange, it becomes quite easy for women, not only women, but for men and women, for anybody to have a more diverse and liberal, you could say, sex life. And we could say the second point is about the sort of prevalence of postmodern values that are also prevalent in Kazakhstan. But as I mentioned, these are sort of conflicting values, conflicting gender norms. And the reason why I argue that male sex work has become so popular is that, or is becoming more prevalent, is that the fear of public shaming will prevent women from having casual sex with acquaintances or strangers, like Nurpeysa mentioned. And there was a small but interesting study made by a sociology student, Boranbay, in 2020, about users, female users of dating apps, regular ones like Tinder or Mamba. And they reported on being afraid of public shaming, whereas male interviewees did not mention that, did not report on that. It was not an issue for them. So display of female sexuality is still problematic, and even though it's tolerated, even encouraged to some extent, like Nurpeysa mentioned, it should remain hidden because her reputation can suffer from it. So I'll conclude here, but it's just quite interesting that to see that in the information age, these taboo topics can make it to national headlines and be discussed among people, and they always generate a lot of discussions, as you can imagine. And for male escorts, even though if their sex, their offers are heterosexual, it's still a bit gender bending, and there's a lot of backlash in the media, in the comments, in the comment section, that these are not real men. And so this one example of one comment saying that, please man, be man. And finally, so there's an extension of shame to that is shameful behavior is also now also directed to men, because, as Nurpeysa mentioned, they are sexually inadequate, but when they are they work as escorts, they are also shamed to some extent. So I'll stop here, and I'll be looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Hélène. So we'll open the floor up for discussions. If you questions, if you want to just, well, we have a number of people now. If we could do it orderly, we can just open it up. You can open your mic, or if you want to put a chat into the chat, that's fine as well.
Hello, can I?
Yes, please.
Hear me? Hi, thank you so much for the interesting webinar, Professor Thibault. I wanted to ask, because I lived in Japan for a while, and there was a phenomenon of cabaret hostesses who don't provide sexual favors, but something very close to it. So they'll drink with men, it's charged per hour, they'll talk a lot of emotional labor into it. And then on the side, there's also a phenomenon of host men. And it's generally well known that these host men, normal women can also go to them, but generally their clientele actually subsists of these cabaret hostesses. So I was wondering to what extent that the male escorts in Kazakhstan are also perhaps servicing female sex workers in Kazakhstan? Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I'm not sure I can answer that question. That's one of the limitations of this study, is that I don't know who the customers are. And one thing that I didn't mention for the sake of time in the presentation is that there's a comment section on the website, so people can leave comments, like a Google review, right? Female profiles tend to have a lot of reviews. So some escorts, female escorts, have 200 reviews under them. Trans escorts also have lots of reviews, but male escorts don't have reviews. I've seen only one profile with reviews under it. So it's hard to know who the customers are. That's one limitation of the study. But the fact that that's also interesting, and that's one way to support my argument in the paper is that female customers do not brag about their sex life. They don't leave comments, but men do. So that's quite interesting to see the difference as well between the two. But yeah, ideally, it would be interesting to know who the customers are.
Okay. Other questions?
Can I ask?
Is that Madiyar?
Yes, that's me.
Oh, please, thank you.
So I wanted to ask whether you consider using some social networks. If you know, there are a lot of platforms, and not only in English-speaking world like Tinder and other things, but also platforms like Vkontakte, which are very popular here.
Yeah, actually, this research started as my interest in this topic started with VK because I'm following I have a VK account, I'm following some groups, and one is Sadrzanki is sponsoring. So kept women and sponsors. So I know that this entire world of advertisements exists, but it's not, I mean, Sadrzanki are not entirely for sex. It's also some kind of girlfriend experience on a long-term basis. But yeah, and that's an interesting question. I've also looked at OLX, which is like sort of the Craigslist of the Russian-speaking world. And I tried to find, because maybe one of the questions I will get is that these websites are not the only places to advertise male sex work. So there might be other platforms to advertise homosexual services. But I could not find anything. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, but I could not find evidence that this is those services are presented to that extent, to that scale on other websites. But yeah, I think Vkontakte, OLX are also places where people offer, they usually massages, but yeah, it's probably more than that. But yeah, it's this website has a large number of advertisements, but yeah, you're right, VK and OLX also have their share. But I couldn't find evidence of that.
Sorry.
Yep. Go ahead.
I was going to say, we'll go to Neil, and then we have 2 comments in the chat. So Neil, then chats, and then we'll open it up to others.
Okay, thanks, Helene. I was just wondering, since you made the case at the beginning that this was, really peculiar to here. I mean, the obvious question is why should it be? I mean, is it the nature of the? You mentioned the former Soviet thing, but then we'd expect to find it in other, former Soviet places. Is it something to do with the legal framework? Or maybe like the last questioner said, maybe in other markets, different ways are used to advertise the availability of the service. But I know you haven't finished, but I just wonder, would you speculate a little bit about why it should be here?
Yeah, I think good question. I think since I'm quite familiar with Tajikistan, where I've lived and researched, so I can offer some comparison. I don't think that would be possible in Tajikistan to that extent. And I think Kazakhstan is an outlier in that sense in Central Asia, because society is less conservative than in other regions, in other countries of Central Asia. So, I mean, based on anecdotal evidence, we can say we all lived in Nur Sultan, and it's very obvious that young people have a liberated sexuality, right? So, and I think this is Nur Sultan and Almaty are outliers in the region in Central Asia. So it's just a difference of degrees of conservatism, I think, that explains that. And the fact that, Kazakhstan is richer and women have more money. and they can afford sex work. So that would be interesting to compare in terms of power of, how do you call that in English? Power of purchase, purchasing power. So I think Kazakhstani women have more purchasing power than other Central Asian women, and the fact that values are less conservative here.
Yeah, then I suppose if you did it over a period of time, if that was possible, you'd see whether it related to, in fact, increased prosperity. Would you be able to check whether in darker economic times it didn't exist, and as people get even more affluent, will it increase more? I don't know.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that would be quite interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So did the prices dip during the quarantine, or did they rise? Are you tracking the prices?
There was one article that mentioned that prices were dropped a little bit during the pandemic. Yeah. So I haven't observed that myself, but one article from the press reported that.
Okay, so Zhibek asks, were there commentaries addressed towards males with the goal of shaming them?
No, the commentaries on the, so you mean, Zhibek, on the, hi Zhibek, on the website, or in the newspaper articles? Because on the website, there were very few comments. There were no reviews led by women. There were very few, and some of them actually were written by couples, because some of the customers are couples. But the commentaries left on, so did you mean the newspaper?
Yes, I meant, first of all, I meant the website, this platform, and then now, as you say about the newspapers, it's also interesting that there are no commentaries, because usually when some kind of gender role is involved in relation to women, females, there are hate commentaries addressed towards their femininity. And here I was shocked that there are no such commentaries.
Yeah, there are no reviews on the website of the escorts website. There's one or two, but in the newspapers like Tengri News and other platforms, there are a lot of comments. I would say, and there were 107 comments on the story that I mentioned in the beginning, and I've actually looked at them, and 34 out of 107 comments were in support of the male escort. And they were saying, he's just trying to make a living for himself, leave him alone. This isn't honest. Why not? Why wouldn't we let them pay taxes like good citizens? So this was quite interesting. And then you also had people who were shaming them, saying, oh, these are not real men, gigolos. So they are ridiculous, pazor, it's a shame. And then others who were playing the religious card, like this is haram, it's unacceptable in our society. And some other neutral comments, but it was quite interesting that a lot of people were supporting male escorts.
Okay, oh, sorry, Zhibek, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, thank you. Okay, so Kores has a comment. I'm curious about the idea of dueling masculinities in the sense of the escorts feeling pressure to be masculine, but also about the shaming of husbands' masculinity. This seems like such an interesting angle.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's so, yeah, usually we often think of shame, the idea of shame from a gender perspective. So shaming female sexuality for being too liberal, too extravagant, I don't know. And then, but here, yeah, men are considered inadequate, impotent. And in the paper, I also report on a recent interview that Nursultan Nazarbayev gave in December. And so it was a television interview. And again, it was reported in Tengri News. And he is, Nazarbayev gives advices to men. So he says, man, you should keep healthy, don't be overweight. And he gave like what he eats in the morning, so, and how he exercises to keep fit at his age. So that was quite interesting. So there is, I think, an increasing pressure on men, also Kazakhstani men, to be adequate, to be fit and healthy. So yeah, there is quite an angle here going on. Yeah, quite an angle. That's not a real sentence. There's quite an interesting angle that we can see through. Oh, I can't speak. Question.
Other questions?
So it's not a question. Thanks, Ellen, for a very interesting presentation. It's just, the way you started, I'm forgetting the name of the person, but the quote with which you began, and it seems to me that most of the market is, the demand is coming from married women whose husbands fail to satisfy their wives sexually, rather than unmarried women who can probably have a boyfriend. And because these are married women who have healthy, who have richer husbands, so potentially they can pay these men and might get away with it because their husbands want to keep their honor intact. That shaming that they are incapable of satisfying their wives. That's why the wives need someone else.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't think of it. Yeah, so rather pay than being shamed with the sort of the so you have your husband's approbation to go to an escort. Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't think of it, but again, I'm not sure women who use those services are married. I mean, it could be. His assumptions were that yes, they were married women, but he also mentioned businesswomen, which we can think that they are understood as independent working women. But yeah, but you're correct that maybe, yeah, it's a way to keep your honor, yeah, by paying your wife. And some comments in the Tengri News article were also like that, say, hey, why not offer a nice present to your wife? So that was also very surprising. So husband saying, yeah, why not? So that's quite interesting. Yeah.
Do you plan to take it further, Ellen? I understand this is a very sensitive subject, but to explore beyond these statistics, in terms of finding answers to some of the questions people are asking.
I would be interested in. I'm not sure Enyu would give me ethics approval for that. Well, maybe I could try. But yeah, I would love to. But I think it would be very difficult to find respondents, even for my polygyny project. Yeah, I had a hard time, and it's not as controversial as sex work, I think. So yeah, I would love to, but I don't know how, if it's feasible.
Caress extends her comment, or adds on to the comment, I think. She says, there might be a divorce factor as well, since there are so many who marry young and then divorce.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't mention it, but it's part of my paper. I mentioned the divorce rates in Kazakhstan, which is very high, and that, yeah, there are a lot of single young women in Kazakhstan and men. But yeah, divorce rate is really high because people marry young and then in their late 20s, they're already divorced. And I looked at the statistics as to the reasons why people divorce. And the first reason was the influence, the pressure of the in-law family, which is a big issue for women often in Kazakhstan, who are at the service kind of their in-law family, of their in-laws. So that's the first reason. And I think the third reason was that because we can. It's a bit of, the wording was a bit strange in Russian, but basically it's an option to divorce. So that I'm not sure exactly what this means, but to me, maybe it indicates such as, it indicates a willingness to explore more of relationships, either romantic or sexual relationships. That could be definitely, the divorce rate is definitely playing a role here, I think.
Can I have a question?
Yes.
So in your presentation, you mentioned that there is a pricing difference between Nur Sultan and Almaty. Have you looked into any other differences, maybe in cultural differences between the north and the south, like say Pavlodar and Shymkent? Is there any difference in culture, in terms of culture perceiving?
Not really. I would say, so in my paper, I also look at the kind of services that are offered. Like you saw in the little anqueta, like they say, like kissing on the mouth, like group sex, for instance. And this is also present in Agazin and Tuluev research, their research. And there are not that many differences, to be honest. The differences are about the ethnic composition of, the ethnic identity of the profiles of the people who advertise, of the escorts. So there you see, between different regions of Kazakhstan, you see differences. But even in Almaty and Nur Sultan, the ethnic composition was fairly similar, and it more or less represents the ethnic composition of the entire country. So that's interesting. But one finding that Agazin and Tuleyev made is that Métis tend to charge more money. So those who I identify as Métis, so mixed race, Russian, Kazakh, Korean, Russian, they tend to charge more, higher prices. So that's interesting. That's one finding. And men and women. So Métis women also tend to charge more. But I haven't looked at other cities myself. So I could just consider, but they are on the website. They are other cities from Kazakhstan. Shymkent is there. Pavlodar, I'm not sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, there's a message in the chat from Basit. Thank you for the presentation. Since you mentioned it is more popular in Kazakhstan as compared to other Central Asian countries, does the economy play a role because females become career-oriented, and in Asia, age of females is a factor in getting married?
Yeah, I think so. Well, when Neil asked the question about comparison to other Central Asian countries, I sort of hinted in that. I think, yeah, definitely the economic situation in Kazakhstan gives more purchasing power to women, so to buy sex services. And maybe migration also plays, internal migration plays a role. So a lot of people migrate. I don't mention it in the paper, but that's one aspect that we could consider. A lot of women migrate from, a lot of people migrate from regions to big centers in Kazakhstan. And they are separated from their social network. So maybe they have a tendency to explore more. That might be one option. and I think one thing that I didn't mention in my presentation, and I do in the paper, and I think it's fair to assume that this is an urban phenomenon rather than a rural occurrence. Again, I don't have strong statistics to prove that, to demonstrate that, but I think it's more likely to happen in big cities than in the rest of Kazakhstan.
All right. Any other questions? I was wondering about the security issue. If they're going out for pizza and things, like how socially interactive are these encounters? Do you get a sense of that from the profiles, or do you imagine how it might work logistically in terms of having busy family lives, or if there is a domestic arrangement?
Yeah, good question. The prices that I mentioned, they are there are different sets of prices. So it depends if you are meeting at the place of residence of the escort, or if the escorts will go to your place, or in the hotel in Banya. There's a special section, Banya. So that's very Kazakhstani, the Banya thing, or post-Soviet. And in the car as well. There's also a set of prices for having sex in the car. So, but I would say, so the prices that I used for making the average are prices if they are going to you. So the majority of escorts do not host. So they will go directly to your place. So at least, I mean, you can probably feel safer in your house than if you go to someone else's house. In the car, I don't know, but in the car is usually more expensive. A banya is also more expensive. But yeah, I don't really know that. But what I know is that there are different places where they can meet. Yeah.
And I guess there's no way of knowing what is the most common used service.
Yes, there is, but it will take a lot of time. Oh, used service.
I don't, like location-wise, yeah.
Location-wise, I think it's visiting the person at their own place, because a majority of escorts don't host. So, but I think banyas, it hasn't been documented, but everyone who has been to a banya in Kazakhstan knows that this is a place known for prostitution. So banyas are probably very, very common as well.
Junho writes, it would be interesting to take a look at the interaction between purchasing power and conservative views on women's sexuality. When women have a certain level of purchasing power, but it is hard for them to find a way to get their needs met, these can create supply.
So you mean the more money they have, the more money they have, the less satisfied sexually they will be?
I mean, so if the women has they have some under restriction on kind of expressing their desire to find a mate, then maybe it would be, so maybe so the women can try to find a mate by paying something rather than just randomly finding their mate, maybe on the dating web or something. So.
Yeah, maybe some men would also be turned off by women who have more money than them. That could be also, one reason why wealthy women would have problems finding partners. Yeah, that could be, yeah. But yeah, during pandemic, I think, as we have all seen, that reports are showing that women have lost purchasing power, but But yeah, but we don't know to what extent these men are very busy with their sex work. As I mentioned, the literature often shows that they do it on the side. It's not their main occupation, and yeah, they might not make a lot of money from it. So yeah, to what extent women are buying those services, I don't know.
Okay. Oh yes, Noreen, another comment.
It's just again a comment. I'm not very well aware with other social factors, but in other contexts, usually when men often migrate to other countries for financial reasons, they leave behind wives. And of course, they have needs, and this also create demands, particularly in societies which would not consider sex outside marriage as legal. So do you see any patterns of outward migration, male migration in Kazakhstan?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I mentioned earlier the migration, but females migrating to other cities. But yeah, men also move around a lot in Kazakhstan, and indeed they might leave behind their wives. They can find a new partner, for instance. And yeah, so if they are busy, I mean, it's true that it's probably easier to call a professional whom you can perhaps trust because this person has a profile, and even though there are no reviews, but you can think that they are a professional and they won't mess around, unlike a random stranger on a dating app. And yeah, so it's not time consuming to find those people. It's more straight to the point, and yeah, that could be it as well. Yeah, a lot of people migrate even from Almaty to Astana and vice versa. So because men actually, in my research on polygyny, there's this saying that I found in one article. It says Almaty Baybiche Valmaty Baybiche Vastanie Tokal. So it means in Almaty I have my first wife, and in Nur-Sultan Astana I have my second wife. So this is something that polygyny is quite widespread in Kazakhstan, and is I argue in my research that it's fueled by migration from cities, not necessarily international migration, but domestic migration. So maybe that's the case also for women left behind kind of by the husbands due to internal migration.
Thank you.
Did you say that the biggest service was to married couples, like that you would have the male coming into the married couple? So this is kind of like, or was I mistaken?
It's not. It's popular. It's quite widespread. In my paper, I have the statistics. I don't remember exactly, but yeah, it's fairly common to serve couples. But at the same time, we don't know if the interaction will be between the three people, but some escorts have mentioned specifically, I serve couples, but I only interact with the woman. So it's sort of, I don't know, some kind of voyeur fantasy, I suppose. I don't know, but something that I looked at that I didn't mention here, but I did in the paper, is one argument proposed by a journalist was that these are dominant women, dominant in the sense of sort of BDSM sense, right? So domination, psychological, philosophy, or physical domination. These are dominant women who have a hard time finding submissive partners. So I was curious about that, if that's one explanation, but I don't think there are that many dominant women in Kazakhstan. Maybe. And I looked at on the profile, there's a category that you can click, men and women can choose if they provide services to mistresses. So in Russian, they use the word gaspaja. It's literally mistress. So there was, but I found, so I looked for it on the website, but this service is not offered by a lot of people. Only 10 or 12% of male escorts will offer services to be dominated by mistresses. So that's marginal.
All right. Any other comments, questions from anyone?
Yeah. Yes, I have a question, Helen. Thanks. So because we have a competition now between this website and Tinder, so I see the incentive for the escorts to post so they can gain income. But for the customers, I mean, if they can get the same on Tinder for free, like, I don't know. I mean, I know it's difficult to study customers, but I'm just thinking about the motivation.
Yep. Yeah, I think the motivation is that you are sort of sure that the escort will not talk about this to anybody. Yeah. So like Nurpesa was saying, better than go to a professional than have random sex with strangers who this might have an impact on your reputation. So and the fact is that on Tinder, you are being seen. Your profile is being seen by anybody who has downloaded the app. Whereas there, it's only the escort's profile that is visible. So you can anonymously contact this person and say, I would like to have this and that. So Tinder, first, you are visible. I mean, you can hide your face. You can choose to not show your face. But yeah, there's this, and then there's always a risk that you will be uncovered and perceived as having light manners. Yeah. So I think probably that's why. And yeah, so like I said, the average price is 15,000, but there are people, male escorts, who charge 8,000 tenge per hour. But that's really cheap. So even some 5,000. So that's, yeah, it's really not a big amount of money.
Have you tried to reach out to any of the male escorts to interview them?
No, I didn't, because I didn't ask for.
Oh, right, yeah.
So, but I'd like to. Yeah, I'd like to do that. I don't know if NU will allow me to do that, but that could be interesting. Yeah. But unfortunately, one other problem at NU is that we cannot pay our informants. So it would be ideal if I could offer, I don't know, 5,000, 8,000 tenge for an interview. So maybe they would agree, but we cannot.
All right. Any final comments? Let's see, Nareen, are you unmuting to comment again, or?
What you said, Ryan. It will be a very interesting study, although I'm not sure even you will get ethical approval from NU IRIC to do the study, but you know, it will be very interesting. Maybe one way of getting away with it would be to find a research partner outside in another university so that they can go through their own IRIC procedures. But lots of questions might be answered. It's just a comment in relation to what Alexei said, and you offered a kind of convincing answer why women might go there and pay rather than go to Tinder and get their needs met for free, because I think it's not just the reputation of a woman, it's the reputation of the entire family. And if the woman has a husband, it is good for the husband just to pay for the needs of the wife. As long as everything remains hidden, everybody's happy, and the entire reputation of the family is protected in that way.
Yeah, you're right. It's not only about the woman. It's her surroundings as well. Yeah, that's a good point.
Because it brings shame to the man, actually, especially if the woman is married. Why would you go to another man if the husband can keep her happy?
Yep. Yeah, you're right.
Caress says we can pay participants. Let's chat about it. I'll tell you what I know.
Actually, yeah, there is a way. I know, but yeah, we can still talk about it. Yeah.
Okay, Neil, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to say something?
No, I was going to, as a member of the IREC committee, I was just going to turn my sound down.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other comments? Well, it seems like everyone's had their fill, unless there's a last minute nagging question that needs to come out. All right, well, thank you, Hélène, for presenting for us this month. And so I think we'll be having a guest speaker next month. Caress has invited a colleague to present a book, which we'll be putting out information very soon. So thanks again for this wonderful talk, and we'll see everyone. Oh yes, Caress says Ed Schatz. So
yeah, Ed
we'll
Schatz,
be putting this this advertisement out very soon. So that's it for us today. Thanks for everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Well, bye. Thank you.
Bye.